video is brought to you by Avid Armor. Avid Armor makes high-quality vacuum sealers that are perfect for keeping your wild game meat fresher for longer. I use mine for wild mushrooms, fresh produce, and so much more. If you're interested in learning more, there's a link in the description box down below. Hi folks, my name is Allie DeAndrea. Today I'm going to show you how to butcher a deer. This is a whitetail buck that I killed in Pennsylvania, I guess about 5 days ago at this point, and it has been hanging outside dry aging because the temperatures have been just right. For dry aging deer, you want the temperatures to be somewhere between 34 to 45 on the high end. If food is a big reason why you hunt, understanding the anatomy of the animal and how to process it at home will only yield better results in the kitchen. It's one of my favorite parts. So, without further ado, let's jump right into it. First thing, you'll notice that the hide is no longer on this deer. You want to remove the hide within 24 hours of killing your deer. And if it's hot out, you want to remove it as soon as you possibly can in order to cool the meat down. Let's break this thing down. So I'm gonna grab my knife. I'm going to start right up in here, kind of at the, the groin. Make a cut just there at the base of the leg. Start to work my way down. So this is part of the flank. So right now my knife is hitting that rib, and I'm just going to follow that rib down and out. Now we have a piece of flank meat. We'll set that off to the side and we'll repeat the same thing on the opposite side. Now that we've removed those portions of the flank, we have revealed some of the jewels of the animal. These are the tenderloins. The tenderloins are arguably one of the most tender cuts on the animal. They're located on the inside, as you can see. This is the inside of the deer. These are ones that you might want to consider removing the night that you kill your deer. So you gut your deer, you skin it, you have it hanging just like this. You can go ahead and remove those tenderloins that night if you choose. Reason being because they're so small. Now that this has aged a little bit, you'll see when we go inside and finish processing it that we do have to remove a little bit more than we would because of that age. So that's a personal preference kind of thing. You'll see people do it a lot of ways. I decided to keep mine in, and it's time to cut them out now. Now, the tenderloins run up a little bit higher, sort of into the back ham than what meets the eye. So you want to take a second here to really sort of follow this muscle up to see where it inserts into the back leg. So I'm actually going to start right here. See how this fat is kind of giving me a line to draw through? I'm just going to lightly trace that line, sort of peel back the meat until I can really start to see where the tenderloin is. I'm going to cut up. You can cut off some of this fat if you want, but it will also just come off later in the butchering process. So I'm going to cut it up here. Okay, see I'm making a cut right there. And then you can kind of draw the outer edge of it and really start to pull it out and down. My hands are so cold. Now all I'm doing is getting my fingers in there and really just pulling and wiggling it out. Well, just like that. This one. Same thing on the other side. Really take your time with this too. I know that some people can butcher so fast and it's really incredible and cool to watch, but if you're someone who processes 1 deer a year, you know, maybe 2, really take your time with this. There's no rush. Ooh, my fingers are cold. now it's time to remove the front legs. Start to pull it away and you'll see where the knife naturally wants you to cut. Oh, yes, what we want. Pull and draw with your knife. If you would pull the front shoulder off while the deer was still warm, this thing would fly right off. But because it's cold and hard, it takes, you know, just a little more muscle. All right, so we've opened this up quite a bit. Now we're going to slice through this section here. And again, you just draw with your knife down. It will tell you where it wants to go. And you really can't mess this up because most of this meat that you're cutting through in order to get the shoulder off will end up being scrap meat or stew meat. So there's not too much of a worry of like cutting the wrong thing because it all sort of ends up in the same place. Same thing on the other side. Moving on to the backstrap. Now, the backstrap probably does not need an introduction. It is the most popular, most loved, extremely tender, high-valued cut of meat on the deer. This is what everybody wants, including myself. To remove this, we're gonna start up here at the hip. And if you feel around, let's see. So right here at the seam, where the hind quarter meets the rest of the body, we're gonna start about right there, and we're just gonna cut straight in and straight across. Now, the backstrap does go up a little bit higher than that, but this is a good starting point. I'm gonna repeat that on this other side as well, just to get both sides started. All the way through, just like that. Now, we're gonna take the spine and use it as our guide. So we're gonna go right here where our knife hit the spine. So my knife is hitting the spine. I can't go any further. I'm going to flip it down, but with that blade still pointed towards the spine. And we're just going to start to cut and draw. If you meet a fork in the road, just, you know, switch your knife blade around a little bit. Just keep cutting all the way down, following the line of the spine. I'm gonna go back in here again, sort of retrace that line and start to peel back. So I'm tracing that top line that I just made and that vertical line that I just made, and I'm peeling the meat back. Once you get it started, you can kind of start to pull it away and it will want to naturally come off the bone. So we're pulling as we trace. And again, this is another one that people will do this really, really fast, but I find the more precise you are with it, the more yield you'll get. There's one thing in here that I really want to show you once I get down a little bit farther so you can see what I'm talking about. Within this section of the skeleton that we just took this meat off of, you'll see these little humps. There's one right here, there's one right here, there's one right here. If you took your knife and just went like this, straight down, that'd be fine. But then you'd be missing out on a lot of this meat that kind of rides around these lumps. So just taking your time while you're removing the backstraps, because in my opinion, they are so valuable. They're so delicious. Like, this is one of the cuts that will get someone who doesn't like venison to give it a try and to actually like it. Just taking your time around those bones and really getting as much meat off of there as you can. Now again, it's no worry if you just shave it off, you'll just be missing a little more meat. So this is one that I really like to take my time with. Another thing, you're starting to see the backstrap itself take place. This whole large slab of continuous meat is what the backstrap is. Over here, we're catching a little bit of the flank, which is totally fine. We can trim this off later. You could also trim some of it off now. I'm actually going to draw this line over towards where the backstrap is, and I will remove this later when I clean up my backstrap. I learned this years ago when we first started hunting. We were hunting with some friends, and the guy happened to be a neurosurgeon. When I first had my knife, I was kind of holding it like this, and he said, hold it with your finger out. You want to be precise with it. Like, you want to be able to sort of manipulate it like you manipulate a pencil. So holding your knife with a finger out as if you're drawing something helps have a little more dexterity and helps with a little precision. So once you get up here, we're really starting to get more into neck meat. So once you get to about the base of the neck, you can go ahead and just cut that right off. Okay, and then we'll clean that up later. But that is a backstrap. Repeat on the other side. Now we're going to remove this outer section of meat that's around the rib cage. Really simple. You just start from the top. Again, keeping your knife pointed towards the ribs and the carcass itself. You just start to fillet away. Now this is where the arrow exited, and this meat will all be cut away when we're cleaning things up later. But for now, it's fine to bring that with us and just keep this together as one big continuous sheet. You don't get a whole lot of meat from the rib section, so this is much more sort of high value on an animal like an elk, but I will grind this meat up. It just has a lot of connective tissue, a lot of, see that? Ooh, it's beautiful though. A lot of connective tissue, sort of silver skin, so it needs to be either ground up or cooked real slow. So there is a gland somewhere in this fatty section. You don't want to cut through it with your knife, so if you can kind of cut around it and then cut it out, that's best. But just be aware, basically anywhere there are giant pockets of fat altogether, there's probably a gland in there. So you want to make sure to remove that. Like, you wouldn't want to include that in your grindings. And you also don't really want to cut through it with your knife, because then you can get some of that gland material on your knife and then sort of spread it around through the rest of your meat. So ideally, you just want to avoid big pockets of fat. Kind of cut them away, cut around them. Make sure to discard them. Now we're getting into some of the brisket meat there. That's all good. Cut that off. Okay, so we've got a nice strip here. Same thing on the other side. I'm going to put this with the other sort of flank meat that we cut away earlier. Now I'm going to remove the remainder of the neck meat and the brisket meat. Neck meat is very chewy, so if you want to cook it as a roast, you need to cook it long and slow. It's also great to be ground as well. I know that I want to grind the neck meat, so there doesn't have to be a real technique to removing it, but if you wanted to, you would just fillet it all the way around the spine, essentially, to try and keep it intact for a roast. I'm going to start just picking and cutting away any extra meat that's remaining up here at the neck, just by cutting around the bones, cutting all the way down that spine, and just sort of filleting this off. And again, because I'm going to grind this, I'm not worried about sort of how I get this off. The purpose is really just, get it off the bone. So this is where the esophagus and the trachea were. And because this deer, I shot it right here, right in the lungs, but because he was quartering to me, that arrow ended up going through and cutting through a portion of his stomach. So the inside of this carcass, particularly down, I sort of rinsed it down, which some people don't like to do, but I do like to do it that way because it keeps the meat up at the top cleaner. And now the inside of this carcass at the bottom is contaminated. So you can see actually a little bit here of that contamination on the inside of this throat. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that away now because I don't want that to be included in my grind meat. Okay, so that's one side. Look at that. Ha. Same thing on the other side. So I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but because the arrow did go through a portion of the stomach, when I got back, it wasn't like an absolute mess on the inside. It's not like it went only through guts. It was just a small portion, and I recovered and gutted the deer very quickly after. So really there was just a small portion where the contaminants were found. So I took a hose and I cleaned the inside. That's why the tenderloins look so good. That's why all of the meat up here looked so good. But if you look down here, this is where all of the contamination went. So it's all down in the bottom of this carcass. So the skeleton structure and the muscular structure of the deer has contained it to the inside of this rib cage. So none of that meat that I just cut off was contaminated by the stomach contents. With the exception being the inside of the throat, like I mentioned, where the trachea is, and I have left those portions on the carcass as well. So if this deer had not been gut shot, I would go through and remove the portions of the meat between each of the ribs. And I'll demonstrate how to do that. All of these sections of meat that run through the ribs, you want to stick your knife in and follow the line of the rib. You cut straight down and then follow that all the way back, just like that. And this entire thing can go right into the grind pile. Now on the outside of the carcass, if you want to take your time, you can really cut off more of this grind meat in here. Some of this you may have pulled off with the neck, with the sort of flank meat, but just take your time and go through and collect any remaining chunks of meat, just like that, for grinding. And now we have to remove maybe the second best part of the deer, which is the hindquarters. There's so much incredible meat in the hindquarters. So in order to do this, I'm gonna take a Sawzall and just cut this portion of the spine so that I have a more manageable portion of the deer to work with instead of trying to pull the whole carcass onto my table. So let me finish cutting up the scrap meat, and then we'll take a Sawzall to this buddy. I don't like to fully split this pelvis in the field if I can avoid it, just because it does open up some of the best cuts of meat to more contamination. But really, these legs are sort of held on here by the ball and socket joint of the hip. So I'm going to start up here and basically just cut and work my way around what I feel. So there's a bone right here, and I'm just cutting with my knife down along that bone. Sort of peeling the meat back as I go right here. So we don't need to cut that through there right now, but just for reference, that's where that lives. So I'm going to continue on this side, cutting around, same thing on the other side. There's that ball and joint. Ball joint, rather. Okay. I'm going to use some leverage. Okay, I actually just cracked it right there. That's all it took. But I still don't want to just hack through here because there's a lot of meat that wraps around the back of this pelvis. If you have a table that you can get leverage like this, it will really help. Now, when I flip this over, you can see where all of that meat was sitting on top of the spine here. And by sort of filleting it away from the bone, we were able to get all of that meat that hides on this side of the pelvis, around this little bone that protrudes out, up around these bones that protrude out, and really sort of like skin it out. So now we can achieve the same thing on the other side from a slightly different angle. We won't be able to use leverage as much as we did on the last one, but it's the same principle of really taking your time and filleting all the way around that bone. So now we have to review. Oh my goodness. Now we have front shoulders, back hindquarters, neck meat / brisket, back straps, tenderloins, flank meat. Flank meat, neck meat is going to become grind meat for me. I'll package up the back straps and the tenderloins as steaks. I'll break up these hindquarters into stew meat, jerky, grind meat, tender cuts that can be used for things like stir fry. Then I have front shoulders. Front shoulders can be a mix of grind meat, stew meat. There is a cut called the flat iron in the front shoulders that you can use for steak if you choose. But that is the yield off of this book. I will be creating more videos on how I break down each of these pieces, so stay tuned for those. But that is it, you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.